right, students, I want to talk about the EWA. The EWA is a technical writing assignment that we are going to do for Lab 1, which takes place on March 20th. So when you go to Lab 1, you want to make sure to keep all of your results from your notebook or your StatCrunch results. You can save your results in StatCrunch. There's a save feature that you can ask your lab instructor if you don't know how to use, or you could just copy and paste your results from StatCrunch into a Word document and email it to yourself. But whatever you do, you want to make sure you hang on to those graphical displays and numerical summaries that you create during Lab 1. You'll have a week to write your paper, and it is due on March 27th. So that's 1 week later. And then we only accept late papers up through April 3rd, so 1 week after the due date, all right? So every student should be collecting their own data in Lab 1, so make sure that you're doing your own work. Copying another person's EWA in whole or part is plagiarism, and it will be turned into the Office of Academic Integrity. All right, I'm not going to read through everything on here verbatim, so I want to make sure that you read this in detail, even though I'm not going to go through every detail. This set of guidelines is available in the EWA folder on Pearson under Course Materials, EWA Materials. So make sure to look for all the materials there. All right, so your paper is going to have several sections. You'll need to include a title and an abstract. Even though these pieces come first in the paper, I would suggest that you actually write them last. Definitely the abstract. The abstract is a short summary of your paper, and it's really hard to write a summary until you've actually written the paper. All right, so write the paper, then come back and write the abstract and put it at the beginning of the paper. Okay, y'all might also have some better ideas for a title after you write your paper. Okay, the first section I would recommend that you actually write is the materials and methods section. So in this section, you're going to talk about how to do the lab. You're going to give a detailed description of the experiment's purpose. Why is the experiment done? Then in the next paragraph, describe in past tense the basic measurement process and data collection methods in detail. All right, past tense because you would have already done it by the time you actually write the materials and methods. You might pretend that a student was absent from class and you have to tell them what you did in lab so that they can also do the experiment. One tricky part about the materials and methods section is that you do not want to give any results away here. You just want to talk about what you did and why. For statistical methods, you want to talk about what kind of summaries did you calculate? Did you calculate proportions, frequencies, medians? What did you calculate and why? Also, what graphical displays did you create and why? Did you create histograms, scatter plots, stem and leaf plots? And why did you construct them? All right. But again, you want to tell why, but you don't want to give results. So I'm going to give you an example that has nothing to do with this lab. But let's say I was doing an experiment to study the distribution of weight for college male students. And I said, we constructed a histogram of the distribution of weight for college male students so that we could see the shape of the distribution for weight. Now, I didn't say what the distribution was, so I didn't give away any results. If I gave away a result, I might say something like, we found that the distribution of weight for college male students is right skewed. Then I gave away some results, and I don't want to do that in the materials and methods. I just want to say, we constructed a histogram so we could see the shape of the distribution. All right, so I hope that gives you an idea of what we're looking for in the materials and methods. In the results section, this is where you're going to present your tables and figures without interpretation. So it's this very dry section, just numerical results and graphical summaries. The only writing that you're going to have is a roadmap paragraph at the very beginning that tells the contents of each table. You're not interpreting the data, you're just saying what the data is. Table 1 shows summary statistics for heartbeats. Table 2 shows weights of 10 randomly selected college males. All right, I'm just making up examples here. I'm not talking about lab 1 type of content. All right, so but hopefully that gives you an idea. I don't want interpretations here. The tables that you're going to need for this particular lab, the only summary table that you need is table 1.4 should go in the results section. You're going to need to renumber it and, you know, add a table in Word. So just, you know, in Word, you just say insert table, and then you might have to reconstruct the actual table. All right. Table 1.3 from the lab, that will actually go in the appendix. That is the raw data. That's the full set of data. That's what we call the raw data. That goes in the appendix. The 2 figures that you're going to include are your 2 box plots. In lab, you're going to construct 2 box plots. Okay, I'm going to do a super rough sketch of these box plots. You're not going to use mine as an example because I'm just doing a little sketch here because there's a feature of these box plots that you're going to want to make sure that you include. Yours are going to look much nicer than this. But the whole point in lab 1 is that you're comparing 2 different sampling methods. One is called a random sampling method. One is called a judgment sampling method. And you're going to find several means using random samples and then make a box plot of those means. You're going to do the same thing with judgment samples. All right. Now, you're going to want to ask your lab instructor what the true population mean is. And the most important feature of this graph is that you go back and you ask that question and then you impose that population mean over your box plots. Because your whole discussion in the discussion is going to be about how your random sample means and how your judgment sample means relate to this population mean. So if you don't have that line superimposed on the graphical display, then you don't have a whole lot to talk about. And I can see that you've missed the entire point of the lab. All right. Now you can actually hand draw in that line if you need to. Your box plots will come off of StatCrunch, and you should copy and paste those into a Word document. But you could actually hand draw the population mean in there, or you should be able to figure out in Word how to impose a shape and add it that way. But if you're really struggling with that, you can just hand draw it. Okay, you're going to do a similar type of box plot scenario with the standard deviation. So this will be different sample standard deviations using the random sample method and different random standard deviations using the judgment sample method. And again, I'm making super rough sketches here. But again, the other important feature of this graph is that you're going to have that population standard deviation imposed so that you can effectively discuss how the random sample means and the judgment sample means relate to the population standard deviation. I'm sorry, how the random sample standard deviations and the judgment sample standard deviations relate to the population standard deviation. And then from that, discuss which is a better sampling method, the random sample method or the judgment sample method. That's what we're looking for. All right. Okay, so after you've given me the graphs in the results section, then you're going to talk about the things that I mentioned in the discussion question. You know, tell me about patterns in the box plots. Tell me about how the random sample relates to the judgment sample. Like which one has more variability, which one has a longer box plot, which one had a higher mean or median rather. Which one seemed to be a better estimate of the population mean. All right, so tell me these things by referring to patterns in the graph and giving values of key statistics to support your discussion. All right, also in the discussion, you'll point out any shortcomings or limitations of the experiment. And And you can also give ideas for further experimentation that might address the shortcomings or unanswered questions arising from the experiment. All right, one tricky part of this lab is that the setting in the book talks about that you are hired by an environmental consulting firm, or actually you work for an environmental consulting firm, and you're trying to determine which method would be a better sampling method for picking sample locations at a waste dump. And then we actually use the marbles to kind of simulate that situation. So you can maybe just describe that in 1 or 2 sentences at the beginning. And then from that point on, you can describe the lab using the marble scenario. All right, the whole idea is just to investigate the 2 sampling methods, which we're able to do with the marbles. Okay, please make sure to read this blue box so you know what we expect regarding figures and tables. I'm going to give you a quick example of some figures and tables. All right, so this is a how we would expect a figure to be outfitted in the EWA paper. So we want the figure to be numbered. So we have figure 1 and then a brief title for the figure. You don't want to use the numbers that are used in your lab book. If it's the first figure in your paper, call it figure 1. If it's the second figure in your paper, call it figure 2, etc. We also have some tables here as examples. In this red box, I have a poorly formatted table. It's poorly formatted because it's just copied and pasted from StatCrunch. I would say what you should do is just use Word and do insert table and start your own table from scratch. And then you just pull in the pieces from StatCrunch that are relevant, and also use appropriate number of decimals. We don't need 10 decimal places. You can just round to 2 decimal places and that'll be fine. If there are boxes that come out in StatCrunch or cells that you don't need, then don't include them. You know, like if you don't need this, don't include it. So I just rewrote this box and included the pieces that were needed. Again, this is from a different lab, so this table isn't going to make sense for lab 1. I'm just giving you an idea of what to do here. Get rid of columns you don't need, and if you need to add a column, then add a column. And again, number it appropriately. If it's the first table in the paper, call it table 1. If it's the second table in the paper, call it table 2, etc. All right, let's see what else. And if you have units, give units. In this particular example, we don't have units. We're dealing with proportions. But if you have units of measure like feet or inches or pounds, then include those units of measure in your tables and figures. Let's take a look at the grading sheet. When you turn in your paper, this is how we're going to grade your paper. You can earn up to 30 points. You get 1 point for the title. It has to be an original title. You can't just copy the title out of the lab book. Your abstract, that's your summary of your paper. It might feel a little redundant when you write the abstract. That's okay. There's going to be pieces of the paper that feel redundant. But it's a summary, so you have to reiterate some information that you've already put in the paper. All right, here's the materials and methods pieces. We've already talked about that. The results section, you can see that this roadmap paragraph doesn't carry a lot of weight because I told you it's really cut and dry. You're not describing anything. We want to see good data presentation in the tables and figures. That's a big piece of this, so please give well-labeled tables and figures. And then your discussion. This is where we're going to see if you really kind of got the gist of the lab or not. And then 3 points for just overall appearance, spelling, and grammar. Okay, and so that should give you a good idea of what you need to do for your lab paper. And again, all of these documents are available in the EWA folder in Pearson.